Imagine looking down at a sprawling, illuminated city map. You can see the invisible lines society draws, aggressively herding everyone toward the exact same destination. Identical, walled-off cul-de-sacs. Marriage, a mortgage, a closed domestic loop. For generations, the cultural assumption has been that if you don't buy a house at the end of that isolated street, you simply couldn't afford the entry fee. You failed the ultimate societal simulation. But actually, let me look at this differently. What if you aren't failing to secure a spot in the cul-de-sac? What if you are actively, deliberately rejecting a zone of isolation? You are choosing to stay out in the bustling, interconnected open grid, refusing to be zoned into a life that looks successful on paper but feels suffocating in practice. The traditional blueprint demands that we view the nuclear family as the ultimate sanctuary, the only valid destination for a successful adult. It is a Tuesday evening. You are sitting at your kitchen island, looking at a lease renewal that just went up again. You trace the edge of the paper with your thumb. There is a slight tightness in your chest, a quiet calculation of what this autonomous life actually costs. But you sign it anyway. You just let the ink dry and look out the window. Is it possible we aren't terrified of commitment, but rather deeply averse to containment? An entire generation has grown up as careful observers of the quiet desperation hidden behind those gates. We saw the high divorce rates of our parents. We saw the exhaustion of people who followed the rules, paired up, and still ended up profoundly lonely inside their own homes. Society loves to point out the steep financial penalty of avoiding this path. They call it the singles tax. In major cities, an unmarried individual can pay up to $40,000 more annually than a cohabitating couple, just to maintain a baseline existence. The system frames this as a harsh punishment for failing to pair up. It is designed to make you feel like you are bleeding resources while everyone else is building wealth, splitting rent, and pooling dual incomes. Systemically, the entire economic infrastructure is rigged to reward the paired-up microunit and penalize the solitary citizen. But what I keep seeing is a quiet, radical reframe happening in the minds of millions of unmarried adults. What if this isn't a tax at all? What if it is a premium zoning fee? You are willingly paying top dollar for uncompromised psychological real estate. You are buying absolute autonomy, emotional bandwidth, and the sovereign right to design your own floor plan without needing a cosigner for your daily decisions. You are absorbing that financial hit as an investment in your own peace, which is slightly absurd when you really think about it. You are literally paying a $40,000 premium just to decide what temperature the living room should be at 9 o'clock at night. But that is the literal cost of sovereignty. There is something I came across recently in behavioral psychology that I keep returning to regarding how we measure human happiness. The finding, roughly, is that the supposed psychological benefits of marriage often resemble a temporary spike, a honeymoon phase, followed by what researchers call the marriage dip, where well-being gradually returns to, or even falls below, the original baseline, which might explain the deep exhaustion underneath so many of the paired-up lives we observe. The married couple is often forced to rely on a single, fragile load-bearing pillar, their spouse, for all emotional, financial, and psychological support. You see it when a paired-up friend cancels plans for the third time because their partner had a bad day, and suddenly their entire evening is consumed by managing that one relationship's microclimate. What happens to a building when its only structural support begins to fracture under the weight of having to be absolutely everything? But the single person, I don't know if this is exactly right, but the more I look at it, it feels like they build an entirely different kind of architecture. You build a diversified, earthquake-proof infrastructure. Your emotional support isn't concentrated in one precarious column. It is distributed across a wide, resilient grid of deep friendships, chosen family, passionate hobbies, and sustained self-actualization. You maintain a highly resilient, steady baseline of well-being because your foundation is spread out. When one area of your life shakes, the building doesn't collapse. And this brings us to the deepest, most pervasive myth of all, the stereotype of the selfish, isolated single, the lonely spinster, the detached bachelor. We are told that by staying out of the cul-de-sac, we are withholding our value from society. We are told we are self-obsessed, refusing to grow up and take on real responsibility. But if we ask why society pushes this narrative and keep asking why until we hit the absolute bedrock, we find a profound inversion of the truth. The nuclear family, by its very design, hoards its energy, its money, and its emotional labor behind the gates of that cul-de-sac. It has to. Survival in the modern economy demands a hyper-focus on the micro-unit. You lock the doors, protect your own kids, and conserve your resources. The single person, however, operates as the central plaza. Because you aren't pouring all your resources into a closed domestic loop, you donate significantly more time, money, and emotional energy to the broader community. The behavior of remaining single evolved from a supposed societal failure into a conscious, empowered lifestyle shift. And what this reveals about the story you tell about yourself is staggering. You are not an isolated outlier. You are the connective tissue of the entire city. Because you are not walled off. You are the one checking on aging parents. You are the one organizing the group dinners. You are the one with the emotional bandwidth to listen to a friend's crisis on a Tuesday night. You are the true civic lifeblood. And then, after holding the emotional weight of 3 different friends all week, you just go home, lock the door, and eat cereal for dinner in total silence. It might be worth asking how your life changes if you stop viewing your singlehood as a temporary waiting room for a partner. What happens when you stop apologizing for the space you take up alone? If you recognize that tearing up the traditional zoning laws is an act of profound self-worth, not a symptom of being unwanted, you are not missing out on the American dream. You are actively redefining it from a shared mortgage to authentic self-actualization, prioritizing your own mental health over societal expectations. If there is someone in your life who shares this expansive, open grid with you, send this to them. Remind them that they aren't falling behind. The blueprint we were handed was drawn for a world that no longer exists, and we are paying the premium to build something entirely new out in the open. But I wonder what happens to the cul-de-sacs when everyone realizes the plaza is where the light actually is. The grid is already built.